It's not long now before we'll all be voting in a referendum on whether to add an Indigenous voice to Parliament to Australia's constitution. The debate's left a lot of people confused, so TDA is trying to cut through the noise. We've already spent a bit of time talking about where the idea of the voice came from and the politics of the referendum. But after all, this is all about hearing First Nations voices, so it's time to do just that.
We can't keep thinking that someone else has the answers for us, because they clearly don't.
We're supposed to live in a first world country, and our people live in fourth world conditions.
I'm travelling inland to a town called Fitzroy Crossing, where you'll hear from locals about what they want politicians in Canberra to hear. The landscapes in this part of the country are astonishingly beautiful. Here in Broome on Yarrowoo country, you get red sand meeting bright blue ocean. As you drive inland, the scenery changes. It's flat, it's dry, and it's hot. So much so that it's difficult to imagine that only a few months ago this whole area was underwater. I'm standing on the Fitzroy River, which as you can see is pretty dry at the moment, but in January it reached its highest ever level and caused a flood all through the local area. Damaged a lot of buildings in Fitzroy. It also destroyed the main bridge across the Fitzroy River here at Fitzroy Crossing. Our guide, Bunuba elder Joe Ross, showed us building after building which had been rendered uninhabitable.
We lost 80% of the damages of houses and communities has been in our communities, and we've been patiently waiting for temporary housing.
The flood was devastating, but it also presented an opportunity.
The silver lining out of it is there's a focus now on Fitzroy, and it's really raised struggles our communities had.
Federal and state governments who wanted to help with flood relief needed to understand what the community wanted, so a committee was set up to speak to government.
Government started listening to us, both the state and the Commonwealth.
Rene Dingo was also on that committee, and he told us it had led to locals being employed on the project to rebuild the bridge.
And that would not have happened if we didn't have an Indigenous advisory group here in Fitzroy Crossing speaking directly to government, and government hearing what that working group is saying and then saying, okay, we've got to make this happen.
But not everybody we spoke to was so positive about this.
My name's Obi Bedford. I'm a Bunuba woman, Bunuba and Gidya as well from my grandfather.
Obi Bedford is a young language teacher who was frustrated with government still failing to listen to the community's wishes.
We did not get treated with as much care as I think a non-Indigenous town would have. Community came forward with all of their concerns and none of them were addressed. I was at those meetings and they said, this is an issue culturally, this is an issue culturally, this is an issue. So they just weren't heard and there was no accountability for them to be heard anyway.
This feeling of being ignored was a common theme in our conversations in Fitzroy Crossing. Emily Carter has lived here since 1994 when she came to connect with her culture.
Both my parents were members of the stolen generation. So I moved to Fitzroy in 1994 to get to know my grandmother.
She now runs the local women's centre.
We started off with a refuge for women that were escaping family violence. And since then we've grown. We have a legal unit. We also have counsellors and social workers.
Emily says government policies to curb violence are failing because people in Canberra don't understand what's happening here on the ground.
We're supposed to have shared decision making, but that's not what we see. Our outcomes is still determined by Canberra, by bureaucrats that have no idea of the landscape in which we live or have any idea of the communities in which we're servicing.
Obi Bedford sees the same problem in her work with young people.
We have a problem with youth crime. Lots of rural towns and cities have problems with youth crime as well. It's not just us. We actually don't have many youth programs to engage children and to keep them out of trouble, whereas 20 years ago we did. There were more programs for children and for kids, but they've been defunded. We're still being treated as if our children are the issue and the problem and why aren't they going to school? It's like there are probably so many reasons they're not going to school, but why aren't you asking them?
A common theme that emerges is that the community has a better chance when it's empowered.
You know, the rates of suicide, unemployment, poverty, mental health issues. Fitzroy Crossing is one of the leading centres in the whole of Australia. The people that's working on the bridge right now, they're walking around with their head held high because right now they're role models for their kids.
So far, I haven't even mentioned the voice, but people who've taken on positions of community leadership here in Fitzroy Crossing are supporting the yes case. They don't necessarily think that a voice is going to fix everything, but in a context where just about everything else has failed, they say they're willing to give it a go.
It's better than what we have now. Our communities are voiceless. Our children are voiceless. Our women are voiceless.
We can't keep thinking that someone else has the answers for us, because they clearly don't.
But that is not a universal view here in Fitzroy Crossing. We hear pretty consistently that there are lots of people in Fitzroy Crossing leaning that way, either because they don't have any trust in government or because they just don't see how the voice is going to be relevant to them.
I've had a lot of the oldies come up to me and be like, well, I'm voting no. I don't trust the government. Why should I? And I'm like, fair point. One of them was one of my grandmothers, and I love her to bits. And she was like, well, just keep doing what we're doing. Why do we need them to interfere with us?
It's a similar story everywhere we travel. Most people are reluctant to even go on camera, and they certainly seem uninterested in talking about the referendum. This man tells us he's voting no.
I'm thinking about vote no.
Yeah, why is that?
Politics are politics.
But I think it's also that generation of blackfellas that I'm speaking to, they really had the worst of it. And they're like, well, we've survived this long. And I said, yeah, but Odie, look around. There are about 20 kids here riding around on bikes and acting like this isn't the middle of a school day. The school system failing our children, we're gonna keep doing what we're doing. How? We need to change it. We can't keep thinking that someone else has the answers for us. And we can't keep allowing them to pretend like they have the answers for us, because they clearly don't.
I have to admit, I wasn't quite sure what to expect coming here. People just wanted to talk. What they shared was a frustration that answers they had at the community level were not being heard by government decision makers. Now, across all the interviews that we've done in this series, we've heard that general agreement from both yes and no campaigners. Where some of the no campaigners seem to differ is in their belief that a voice won't fix any of these problems.
I've got to say there's not much difference between us. And this is why it's sad in a lot of ways, because we're not that far apart.
Their reasoning for voting no is pretty much my reason for voting yes.
But they've ended up on opposite sides of a politically charged and often really ugly debate. Still, whatever the outcome of the referendum, it's clear communities like Fitzroy Crossing want to make themselves heard, and they say the status quo has to change.
I think people will start to realise that we've got to do something. We've got to change the way our Aboriginal society and our communities and individuals try to get them off the poverty line, start closing the gaps on health and education and economics and that.
I just want to say, we're supposed to live in a first world country, and our people live in fourth world conditions. And we talk about this place being the lucky country. It's the lucky country for a few, but not for Indigenous peoples.